You're listening to a Life in Quebec podcast. For more, visit lifeinquebec.com.
Hi, I'm Michael Bourguignon with Life in Quebec, and welcome once again to Election Perspectives. We're here as usual with our political commentator, Colin Standish. And Colin, this week we had another leadership debate, this one focused on the economy. One of the things that came out of this debate, a lot of commentators were saying that the position of Mulcair and Trudeau was fairly combative. They were sort of butting heads throughout the entire debate, whereas Stephen Harper sort of took more of a laid-back approach. Now, given the stances that they took and the rigor of the debate itself, what do you think it says about their positions on the economy?
Yeah, no, it's an excellent question, and thanks so much for having me here again, Michael. So in this debate, really, it was the economic debate that was hosted by the Globe and Mail, and I believe it was in Calgary last week. Certainly Mulcair and Trudeau did butt heads. There were some I think, some petty comments that, I think Trudeau referred to some of the economic policy of the NDP as puffs of smoke. And then Mr. Mulcair responded, a lot about that, I think referring to the legalization of marijuana, the Liberal Party. So there were some little tips there as well. I think Harper really showed how disconnected he is from the average lives of Canadians, with a couple comments that he said, there's no crisis in the housing sector. I don't know what Canadians he spoke to would ever say that. So that I was talking to some friends who lost a bid on a $700,000 condo the other day, and that's their first property they would own is that much in the downtown of an urban center, and they actually had bid more than the asking price by $20,000 and still lost the bid. Is that normal for Canadians? I don't think so. And as well, when he said sort of the old stock Canadians, that didn't have to do with the economic debate, but I think Harper really flubbed the message, and I think looking back on sort of debate reels, we talk about 1984 with when Mulroney gave Turner a shellacking there about patronage positions after the first Trudeau had resigned, and he appointed a bunch of people in 1984, and then you had an option, so you didn't have to actually appoint these people, and I think that Mr. Harper's old stock Canadians, I think some of his comments on the housing crisis in this country, I think they showed absolute ignorance of the way of average lives of Canadians, and I usually don't use such strong language. But I think positioning, I think that Mulcair and Trudeau are trying to fight for the same slice of the pie that we still see with the polls. It's a three-way race. Trudeau's Liberals are pulled in the second position, just marginally behind the NDP at this point. But of course, with the NDP, you have to remember that they have about 50% of voter intentions in the province of Quebec. So it looks like they're going to do very well in Quebec and hold their own. However, in the rest of the country, not doing so hot. So if you look at the seat counts, look at Aaron Grenier's on CBC, the poll tracker I've mentioned to our viewers before, you have actually the parties are almost tied for seats. So I think it's 115 for the Conservatives, maybe 114 for the NDP, and then 109 for the Liberals. So if you actually look at what that will translate into amount of seats, it still is a three-way race. And sorry, I didn't mean to veer away from the economy debate, but I think you see a certain amount of desperation on part of the leaders. And I think it's interesting that Trudeau, if you look at commentators, people said that Liberals and Trudeau, they have a very definite economic position that they're, with running deficits for several years, as well with other aspects of the tax credit for children, and as well some aspects of the real change, although that was more about democratic renewal, but actually that he offers at least a vision going forward for the country, versus Harper is just saying, look what I've done in the last 10 years, more of the same, maybe, I'm not going to really tell you. So that was my perspective on the debate.
Another area where the numbers are quite close is on the issue of corporate tax rates, where the Conservatives want to keep it at 15%, the Liberals are talking about 16%, NDP talking about 17%. How significant a difference is this, or are the parties just splitting hairs?
Yeah, no, that's a great point, Michael, and I wish I touched on that in the first part, because in the economic debate, I thought it was petty once again, but Mr. Mulcair sort of gave a shellacking to Trudeau. But I think there was a comment by Mr. Trudeau saying, that often companies are shell, that small businesses are shell corporations, etc. There were sort of comments made. And there is some truth to that people will intentionally keep it under $500,000 in revenue to get more tax incentives. So there is sort of that in Canada. There's incentives to keep it small, which creates distortions in the economy. Not that I know mom and pop stores are not doing this necessarily, but there are some tricks. And then Mr. Mulcair sort of said to Trudeau, well, you know a lot about that from the shell corporation you founded for your speaking fees. So that was an interesting part of the debate. But to go back to the actual percentages, it is fascinating. But I think with Mulcair, economists have pointed out that Stephen Gordon, who writes for Life in Quebec, had a great article in Maclean's right after the NDP was talking about increasing tax rates. The problem is you don't get the return on it, right? So you get marginal returns your first, second year. But the thing is, if you can save $1 million by spending $100,000 on restructuring in order to save money, it really becomes diminishing returns, right? So it's like, if you're going to go weed your garden, to spend 20 minutes on it after refreshed and had just had a glass of water, but if you toil away for 20 hours in the sun, you're not going to pick as many weeds per minute of weeding, let's say. This is a strange analogy, but so the efficiencies of higher taxation rates, it doesn't lead to returns in the long run, and of course you disincentivize productivity. So I think the NDP's plan has been shown to not work by economists, particularly Stephen Gordon had a great article, but and as well, I didn't like the comments that that small corporations are shell corporations, etc., by both Trudeau and Mulcair. I don't think that's the case. So there is disincentives. There are incentives to keep it small, and those I think need to be fleshed out. So that was my perspective on the small, corporate the corporate tax debate between Mulcair and Trudeau.
Okay, the weed analogy was actually a good one. Thanks for that. Sometimes in a debate, it's as interesting to see what's not said as what is said. And in this case, it's interesting to note that there was no talk of the Trans-Pacific Partnership, which is a massive trade deal currently being negotiated between Pacific Coast countries. Why do you think this was not on the radar?
It's fascinating. I mean, you haven't seen much talk about that. I think it's on comment in the Globe and Mail. It says we're a trading nation, and trade didn't really come up, right? That what is it? I believe it's was it 30% of our GDP is directly related to trading, is exported out of the country. But we're not talking about these things is ludicrous, right? So, and I think that's it's interesting that we haven't seen more of that, because that's been a big bone of contention between Mulcair, NDP, and Trudeau has been open. Harper's Conservatives have been very open to free trade. Trudeau's Liberals as well. NDP a bit less so. They're very reticent. They're sort of baked into the DNA of the NDP is sort of a reticence about capitalism, about profit generation, about free trade. Not necessarily. That sometimes it comes from an ideological perspective for the NDP, and so I don't think they want to talk about it, because then it would sort of brand them as socialist or leftist, and they've been trying to avoid being put into that corner. But I think Mr. Mulcair on that point is losing out to a certain extent, that he said we're not going to run deficits, etc. But I think when you start to move away from your core constituency, you see politicians or political parties do this, like I believe Paulin Marois in 2014 botched the message for a variety of reasons. It became a referendum election. People, many minorities and many Quebecers in general, were offended by the Charter of Values, or the Secularism Charter, and then also there was Bill 14 before that. Life in Quebec, I think, profiled a lot of my work on that language law. So I think when parties start to shift away from their core constituency, and you see the NDP is trying to grab some more centrist votes by saying no deficit spending, that's when you start to really lose. When you lose your branding, right? When Coke, when Coke became New Coke, people didn't like it, so they reverted to the original formula. So I feel that branding aspect, I think Mulcair is losing out on that debate.
Well, obviously, it's always important to protect the brand in politics. Just to deviate a little bit from the economy on that topic, we're now week 7 of the campaign. We're about halfway through, and we're curious to know. We received just one piece of mail from a local candidate here at the office. We received one phone call from the Conservatives, by the way. But this is all we've seen. The posters are out there, yes, but we haven't been contacted by any of the... and I'm speaking in terms of voters. I mean, our front door is the same as anybody else's. Where are the candidates?
I'm sorry to hear that's happened to you, Michael, and then I guess in life in Quebec that it's voter contact is integral. And I think I said this in the beginning of our series here, as I said, this is a data management campaign. Is that everyone talks about Twitter, Facebook? No, that this time you're going to get target pieces of mail and literature, so that you're not. So maybe my prediction was wrong, that maybe I'm the odd man out on this, but as far as I know, the machinery is there. I'm seeing targeted messages, where I've been, at least, in around this election campaign in Quebec and parts of Ontario. So I mean, I've seen it personally, but I'm sorry that you're not getting that contact, because that the candidates should be out door knocking, that they have 11 weeks. You can visit a lot of your constituency in that time, usually in 35, 36 days. You just want to hit up events in your riding that are 200-300 people, go to the schools, go to old folks' homes, go to daycares, etc. You want to know where there's a critical mass. But really, if you're not outdoor knocking, if you're not at a street corner where there's going to be public transportation at 8 a.m. or 7 a.m., you're missing out, and fairly, I would say you're not doing a very good job as a local candidate, that you should be meeting as many people as possible, and getting that voter contact is integral. If they can say, oh yeah, I looked my candidate in the eyes and I expressed concerns, you're exponentially more likely to get that vote than if they've never met you. Like, it's just, and politician and anybody with common sense knows that. So disappointed to hear that. All I can say, perhaps my prediction on data management is wrong, but I think you're going to see it speed up. We're after Labor Day now. We're heading into the end of September. We're getting the last month of the campaign. People will be fighting for votes, and especially in this campaign, where we have a three-way race still. What's going to happen, right? The parties are going to become desperate. They're going to come up with new policies. What's Harper going to do that he looks like he's going to lose the House? But like I said last time, I think we're going to look at a new Prime Minister October 19th, or very shortly after. We don't know what this Parliament will look like. There's a new Prime Minister of Canada. Mr. Harper will not win a majority, it looks like, unless something, incredible reversal happens. He will have to leave, even if he wins a minority government. He will be forced out very soon after, whether he leaves voluntarily or he's forced out by his caucus, or it'll be Prime Minister Trudeau or Prime Minister Mulcair. We don't know, but we're looking at a new Prime Minister in a month's time, and I'm pretty excited for that.
Actually, an interesting side note in this campaign is a new tactic by the NDP, where Canadians can pay $50, make a $50 donation to the NDP party, and for that $50, they can put a customized sign that would be next to or very close to Conservative Party posters, and these would be branded as a message to Stephen Harper. We saw some news stories about this, and people are sending messages as frivolous as, let's talk about your hair, whatever. As long as it's above board and above the belt sort of thing, I guess anything goes. What is this all about? What do you think of this?
Yeah, no, it's a great question, Michael. I'm reticent to often frame things as a personal attack against Harper, whatever. I care more about the policies or in government, their governing style in general. But I actually really like this idea. I think it personalizes politics. I believe in that campaign. You've had $50 signs you can buy in Calgary, Mr. Harper's home riding, Calgary Southwest or East. I should look that up right after. And then they've raised about $2,000 for it. So I think it's great. You're getting people involved. They're supporting political parties, so to get a little bit of money, candidates who need it, and then you're making it personal again. And I like the idea. I think it's great. You're getting people involved in politics. You're finding an innovative way for fundraising, because our electoral laws are very stringent, as they should be in Canada. But sometimes it makes it harder for parties. They have to get more creative. So no, I love the idea. You're making politics personal again, and what's wrong with that?
Okay. Getting back to the debate, the Syrian refugee crisis made it into the debate, and we're just wondering, how is this seen as an economic issue?
Yeah, no, I think that was actually the retort by Mr. Trudeau to Mulcair, or to actually the editor-in-chief of the Globe and Mail, and he said, let's get away from the Syrian issue. And Mr. Trudeau said, refugees and immigrants, that is an economic issue. And I think it was a very good rebuttal on Mr. Trudeau's part, because obviously 1 out of 5 Canadians are immigrants, and are so obviously important to the economy, not just the social structure of the country, but it is an economic issue if we're bringing in Canadians. And an issue that we're not talking about in this election is, I think, why the average newcomer to Canada, the average male newcomer to Canada, earns 16 cents on the average native-born Canadian male's dollar, and it's 50 cents for any woman who's born out of the country, versus the average male Canadian dollar. A generation ago, it took immigrants about 10 years to move up the economic ladder to start earning almost on par. There might have been a 10% discretion from an average native-born Canadian. We used to bring immigrants in, and they would be assimilated very quickly socioeconomically. In the last 30 years, we have not been able to be as successful as that, right? The stories of doctors or PhDs driving taxis in major urban centers, right? It's not a told story, unfortunately, but that we need to bring newcomers in, not just to accept them, and obviously healthcare is integrally part of that, but to bring them in socioeconomically, and that's harder because you're dealing with the private sector, you're dealing with credentialing that's often at the provincial level. But I think that's something that's not talked about enough, and it's integral to economic policy. But we have moved a little bit away from the Syrian crisis. You sort of see in the papers, economy, etc. But I think Mr. Harper botched the message with Christopher Alexander as well. They looked totally disconnected, like I think Mr. Harper did this week on the Syrian refugee crisis, even though public opinion has shifted slightly away from that right now.
Speaking of new Canadians, the niqab is back in the news. The backstory there being a woman who refused to take the oath of citizenship if she had to remove her full face covering. Do you think this is an important topic?
Yeah, I mean, there was the Court of Appeal, Federal Court of Appeal, if I'm not correct, I believe it was the Federal Court of Appeal. They rendered their judgment saying that you can't exclude people from citizenship ceremonies because they're wearing a niqab or face covering, etc. That it's simply a human right in this country. So I mean, I believe it is the issue. Obviously, it's been a bone of contention in Quebec. But I mean, identity. I'd refer people to a Life in Quebec article I wrote, and other people wrote Life in Quebec articles. But really, clothing is, it's highly symbolic and important manifestation of what they believe. However, it's most minor. It's a very symbolic and minor aspect of religion, and it's critically important to people, as the Supreme Court has said. There was the Amsterdam case where it's basically if you believe in your religious beliefs and there's a rational connection between religion and what you're doing, and it doesn't integrally hurt someone, there's no problem with it, right? The same thing with the Kirpan case, right? I believe Multani is the name of that, where that Sikhs and other groups can have small ceremonial daggers in this country, and that's a human right. So I think that's the constitutional law context, that it's a human right if you believe in it. It doesn't hurt anyone integrally hurting someone else. Why can't you do it in public if it's not offending or hurting someone? Very overtly. So I think it is an issue in Quebec that I think the leaders sort of tap dance around it to a certain extent because they don't want to offend certain core constituencies who might like that idea. So I think the NDP has been in a tough place on that, and Harper has sort of positioned himself as actually being sort of trying to force certain people to remove their head coverings during citizenship ceremonies, and it's totally symbolic, and he's just trying to position himself, I guess, to get core, I believe, more nationalist voters out in parts of Quebec from the Saguenay to the Beauce, where they're targeting and projected to get 7 seats, and they're trying to get up to 15. So I think it's political positioning. I find it, it's obviously, it's deeply offensive that, we talk about, that, we haven't seen our Prime Minister stand up for religious minorities in this country. I find it deeply offensive.
Well, the Bloc Québécois is clearly latching on to this topic and using it to their advantage here in Quebec. What impact do you think that might have on votes for the Bloc?
Yeah, no, it's and that's an interesting thing that I think the Liberal Party of Canada, certainly on minority rights, is usually very much constitutional human rights, and then the NDP I think has to do a bit more of a dance on the issue between not offending their nationalist core constituency, but it is well obviously they're a very social democratic party that's generally, or at least in the past, has been concerned with human rights. Harper, as I just said, positioned himself in a certain way. So the Bloc is trying to make meat out of it, that we're the only party that can represent Quebec, that we're the only ones who can defend identity. This is what the Bloc Québécois and the PQ often say. Obviously, anyone who knows me personally knows I know that's not the truth, but they're trying to position themselves as sort of the hardliners on identity. Whether this works at the polls, if you look at the polls for the Bloc, they've actually gone down, and they look like they could actually get 0 seats. That I saw a projection within the last week that in Doucet's home riding, he's 37 points behind his NDP challenger. That's insane. So I don't think it's tuning in with Quebecers, but we'll see on election day.
Okay, final question. The old stock Canadians comment, is this going to disappear into the news cycle, or do you think this is going to have any sort of long-term fallout?
I hope not. That's a great question. I mentioned it previously because I think with a lot of other Canadians, we sort of widened our eyes and said, oh, that's, you stumbled there and made a big faux pas, and it sounded ethnocentric. It sounded, I don't want to use the R word, but it was, borderline. It sounded racist almost to imply that there are, of course, one or two core ethnicities, and obviously that when Canada was founded, it was mostly British and French and then Aboriginals, and obviously we're a multicultural, diverse nation from around the world. So to say old stock Canadians and the way he said it, I think it was one of those that just showed his utter disconnection with Canada. So I think it's, it's like when Mr. Layton sort of gave the knockout punch to Ignatieff in 2011, where it's, why aren't you in the House of Commons? Canadians, want a promotion, they show up for work. And it was just a look in Ignatieff's eyes where he knew that Layton was telling the truth. He didn't really have a rebuttal. It was that look in his eyes that, that he knew he was wrong. So I think in Harper's case that he just looked so disconnected, and he looked, vaguely ethnocentric in his comments. I think it's going to be one of those turning points in the campaign, honestly.
Okay, well,
negative for the Conservatives, obviously.
Well, we'll keep watching as always. Thanks again for your time. Very much appreciated.
Yeah.
And
thanks so much, Michael.
Thank you, and thank you for watching, whether old stock or new. We are Life in Quebec, and we really appreciate having you here with us.
Thank you for listening to the Life in Quebec podcast. For more news, commentary, editorials, and opinion, visit lifeinquebec.com/podcast.